Long before cities rose or languages formed, before kings and calendars, human beings looked up at the stars and saw meaning. The night sky was not an empty gulf of light, it was a living map, an ancient memory written across the heavens. To the people of the Stone Age, the stars were teachers, storytellers, and timekeepers, whispering truths that no book had ever recorded. Imagine standing in a world without electricity or noise, where night stretched endlessly across the land. Every glimmer of starlight carried weight, every constellation stirred the imagination. People who hunted by day and slept beneath open skies by night soon recognized that the stars were not random. Patterns returned with the seasons, guiding animals, marking harvests, predicting storms. These celestial rhythms became the first language of time. We often think of early humans as primitive, but they were sensitive observers of nature. Without instruments or theories, they mapped the sky with their eyes and their memory. Their temples and carvings echo the dance of the cosmos, alignments that mirror solstices and star paths, etched into stone thousands of years before recorded history. In the dark silence of prehistory, astronomy was not science, it was survival. Even without compasses or telescopes, they could predict the change of season simply by watching where the sun rose, or how the moon tilted across the horizon. Each flicker of firelight against cave walls told a cosmic story. In these primitive observatories, humans found comfort in patterns that never failed them. Stars became guardians of continuity, silent witnesses to the birth of thought itself. When you wander through the ancient caves of Lascaux in southern France, you find more than images of animals. Those famous paintings, bison, bulls, and stags, might reflect constellations seen in the Ice Age sky. The dots scattered among them echo the stars of the Pleiades cluster, a pattern still visible today. The cave, lit by flickering flames, became both sanctuary and observatory, a cathedral of starlight carved into living rock. The Stone Age dreamer who painted those walls did not separate heaven from earth. The creatures on stone were part of the same grand design traced across the heavens. For them, the night sky was a mirror of life below. Each star was a heartbeat of creation, an eternal rhythm repeating endlessly beyond human reach. Above forests and plains, the Milky Way stretched like a highway of spirits, guiding travelers in darkness. Some may have followed its glowing arc to find new hunting grounds or sacred places. To move beneath that cosmic river was to travel the same path the gods themselves once walked. It was the first geography written in light. With every passing generation, the knowledge of the stars deepened. Families passed it on beside fires, storytellers weaving myths that held astronomical truths. A child born into a tribe would grow up recognizing that the return of certain stars meant hunting season, that the lengthening shadows meant winter was near. In these stories lived calendars, weather forecasts, and rituals of hope. In the deep night, when fear crept close and only embers glowed, the stars offered reassurance. They were constant when everything else could change. Hunters might vanish, seasons might fail, but Orion would always rise again in winter, steady and bright. The universe offered a pattern, and within that pattern, humanity found peace. Across distant parts of the world, the same stars inspired the same awe. Different tribes spoke different tongues, yet their myths often resemble one another. The same cluster of lights might be seen as a hunter in Africa, a king in Mesopotamia, or a spirit bird in the Arctic skies. The constellations changed names but not purpose. They gave a face to the unknown and a story to the infinite. For the people of Göbekli Tepe, in what is now Turkey, the night sky was no less sacred. Over 11,000 years ago, they raised stone pillars carved with animals and symbols that scholars believe may align with specific constellations. The structure's layout follows patterns too deliberate to be chance. It is as though those ancient builders were encoding the heavens into stone, ensuring that once the stars moved on, their wisdom would remain rooted in earth. Humanity's first temples pointed upward, not downward. They were born from curiosity about the sky. To lay stones in echo of celestial order was to bring the heavens closer to human life. These places, part observatory, part shrine, suggest that early humans saw no division between the physical and the divine. To understand the stars was to understand the mind of creation. What is most remarkable is not the technical precision, but the emotional intimacy those people shared with the cosmos. They did not watch the stars from afar. They lived within them. Every movement of light across the sky shaped their choices, their faith, their destiny. To be human was to be part of a vast, unfolding pattern whose story was written in light and darkness. As millennia passed, that instinct persisted. Even today, we look up for guidance, drawn to the same constellations our ancestors once traced with bare fingers in the air. The universe still humbles us, still stirs questions older than civilization. How did they know where to look? How did they measure what cannot be measured? The stars do not answer, but they invite. To drift under those prehistoric skies was to feel both small and infinite. No walls confined thought, no cities drowned the starlight. The early humans listened to the rhythm of celestial time, and in hearing it, they began to dream beyond survival. In that act of wondering, humanity became what it is, a species seeking meaning in the unknowable. When we stand beneath the same stars today, surrounded by the hum of technology, we forget that our cosmic awareness began with those first quiet watchers. Their hearts beat to the pulse of the universe, their eyes burned with questions that still echo in ours. Theirs was not ignorance of science, but the birth of it. The night, for them, was not darkness, it was truth. Every spark in the heavens marked a doorway into understanding, a point of contact between the mortal and the eternal. Their world ended where the stars began, and in that meeting, they found faith. Each generation after them carried a flicker of that wonder forward, until curiosity turned into knowledge, and myths became maps. Beneath the timeless vault of stars, early humanity was not lost, it was found. The sky was their first teacher, their first mystery, their first story. And though the languages of their time have vanished, their cosmic instinct remains in us. To look up is to remember who we are, to remember that every journey of discovery began with the same gaze into the unknown. In the quiet hills of southern France lies a secret deeper than time. Hidden beneath layers of earth, the Lascaux caves open into a realm of darkness where prehistoric eyes once turned to dreaming. The flicker of torches long extinguished once lit the painted walls, revealing visions of animals, spirits, and stars. It is here, beneath stone and silence, that we meet the first sky watchers of our known world. When explorers rediscovered the cave in the mid-20th century, they believed they had uncovered a shrine of hunting magic, a gallery of ancient life. And yet, patterns lingered that could not be explained by mere survival. Amid the deer and bulls, clusters of dots appeared, small, deliberate, glowing from the past. They seemed to follow no animal form, no natural curve. They echoed something higher, something that belonged not to earth, but to the sky. As scholars studied those marks, a pattern began to emerge. One group of dots, placed above the shoulder of a painted bull, mirrored the stars of the Pleiades cluster. The bull itself resembled Taurus, the celestial bull still traced by astronomers today. What appeared at first to be decoration now looked like design. Thousands of years before the first temple stone was lifted, early artists may have drawn the heavens with ochre and charcoal. Imagine a small group of hunters sheltering inside that cave on a cold Ice Age night. The firelight dances on walls alive with their painted visions. One elder gestures with his hand, pointing between the flickering dots above the bull's back. He names each one softly, giving them meanings that his people remember when the season turns. Outside, snow drifts fall, and the stars above shine in the same formation that burns now upon the rock. The cave itself mirrors the cosmos. The universe is enclosed within its curved walls. This idea transforms how we see these people. They were not primitive minds expressing fear of the void. They were documenting a structured awareness of the sky through art, preserving celestial memory through symbols. Their world was not chaos but pattern, a great wheel turning above and below, and they sought to capture its rhythm before it vanished into darkness. Some of the dots align with known constellations of the northern sky: Cygnus, Orion, and the Pleiades, each appearing at times of migration and rebirth. These constellations would have marked passages in time long before any written calendar existed. The light returning each winter, the shifting position of the stars in the night, they told people when to hunt, when to seek shelter, when to expect new life among the herds. It was not superstition, it was the first astronomy. The great painted chambers of Lascaux seem less like a gallery and more like a celestial classroom. Each section whispers a fragment of an ancient calendar. The bulls may represent the strength of the sky in spring, the deer, the arrival of autumn. Even the narrow passageways between chambers echo the winding path of the Milky Way stretched overhead. Within stone walls, humanity rehearsed the order of the cosmos. Standing still within that space, the air damp and cool, one begins to understand how these early humans saw time not as a straight line but as a circle of returning stars. The ceiling S-shapes form constellations to the eye that has learned how to see them. Every curve of antler and wing becomes a cosmic marker, a rhythm painted into stone for generations unborn. They made sense of eternity through observation and ritual. The torchlight that illuminated those sacred figures was a fragile bridge between two universes, the earthly and the celestial. The warmth of flame reflected in the same rhythm as starlight outside. The people of Lascaux knew that as the light of one world waned, the other brightened. Night became not an absence, but a mirror. In their silence, the universe was reflected back to itself through human vision. We tend to measure intellect by technology, but in the flickering glow of Lascaux we meet another kind of genius, the intelligence of feeling, of connection, of recognition. Those people looked upon the cosmos not with equations but with empathy. They recognized the harmony between their breath and the movement of the stars. Their understanding was poetic, intuitive, and yet profoundly ordered. This was the birth of cosmic memory. And so these painted caves did more than hold art, they became tools for survival and meditation. The knowledge of when the stars returned guided migrations through bitter winters. The constellations became calendars for the plants they gathered, the animals they followed. By tracing heaven's symbols on stone, they carried the sky within the earth, creating a universe that could never fade. Beyond the famous Great Hall of Bulls lies a chamber known as the Scharfsehner haunting, mysterious grotto deep within the cave. Here, a man with a bird-like head lies fallen beside a spear and a wounded bull. Above him, a small cluster of dots forms another arrangement of stars. Perhaps this was a myth encoded into starlight, the earliest story of creation and loss written for those who would remember. Each figure links heaven and mortality. The cosmos, to them, was not above but within. The more we study this place, the more it seems that the cave was never meant to be seen by daylight. It was designed for the glow of fire, for the shimmering motion of light that would bring the stars painted in ochre to life. With every dancing shadow, the walls seemed to move, the animals circling in endless procession, as if the night sky itself had descended underground. Within those depths, humans learned that the divine was not distant, it was glowing just beyond the flame. Generations would have returned to that cave, relighting the fires, retelling the stories traced in ash and color. Each stroke of the brush anchored the people to the rhythms of the sun and the moon. Knowledge became a lineage of light passed from one age to another, encoded not in words but in symmetrical dots and mythical beasts. These walls became the first libraries of the cosmos. Outside, as dawn crept across the horizon, they would see that the same alignments drawn in darkness now came alive above them. A bull in the cave, a bull in the sky. A cluster of 7 dots above its shoulder, a cluster of 7 stars rising eastward in early spring. The micromap below matched the celestial map above. They were learning to read the universe itself. The lines between art, science, and belief did not exist then. Everything was one motion, one reflection of creation. To paint was to measure time. To sing was to summon the stars. To dance beside the fire was to imitate their movement overhead. In this unity, there was no disconnect between survival and wonder. Every ritual had both a purpose and a poetry that bound people to the great cycles of being. Even the choice of animals might have been deliberate. The bulls of Taurus, the stags of Orion's rise, the horses of the morning horizon, each symbol echoed celestial moments of movement and rebirth. It was as if each creature represented a constellation alive with both physical and spiritual power. They were painted not simply for beauty, but for remembrance, to keep the cosmic order alive within memory. The Lascaux cave system stretches through tunnels and passages that few dared to explore completely. The deeper one goes, the more mysterious the paintings become. Some chambers display geometrical signs, dots, grids, and lines repeated like coded messages. These markings could indicate lunar cycles, the passing of months or seasons, or even more precise observations of celestial change. They are the fingerprints of an ancient science. To live in such close communion with the sky shaped everything in their world. When rain failed or herds moved away, they looked upward, searching not for explanation but for rhythm. The heavens offered balance, a promise that all change followed an order. Each rise and setting of a constellation assured them that time flowed in circles, not chaos. Their calendar was eternal, carved in starlight. The fact that these constellations correspond so closely to modern ones cannot be coincidence. The Pleiades cluster, for example, has been sacred in cultures across continents from Lascaux to ancient Greece, from the Americas to Japan. That shared reverence hints that its recognition began in the Ice Age, when humanity still traveled across continents beneath the same brilliant stars. In that time before separation, the sky was the only map everyone agreed upon. When we stand before the replica of Lascaux today, translated into artificial light, we sense only fragments of its original power. The air of that place is gone, the scent of fire and earth replaced by silence. But if we close our eyes, we can still imagine the flicker, the heartbeat of torch against stone, the faint murmur of breath and prayer. The prehistoric artists are still there, bending close, turning dust into eternity. Their painted dots were not decoration. They were coordinates. They tracked the slow movement of the sun's crossing and the shifting of the stars with the precision of astronomers. They noticed that constellations changed over centuries, that the heavens themselves drifted. Without ever using a number, they grasped the slow breathing of the universe. It was the oldest scientific observation known to humankind. Each returning generation refined this sky law, embedding it deeper into ritual. They danced during the appearance of certain stars. They built fires when the moon grew full beside them. The stars instructed them when to begin ceremonies for birth, mourning, and harvest. Everything sacred in their world followed the movement of the heavens. Light governed life. Lascaux stands as a reminder that the human mind reached toward the cosmic long before pyramids or telescopes. These walls preserve the exact moment when our ancestors began to draw not for survival but for knowledge. That act, the translation of sky into symbol, was the birth of understanding beyond instinct. It is where observation became philosophy. In some ways, those Stone Age astronomers knew the stars more intimately than we do. They lived beneath them without interruption, tracking every season by their rise and fall. They did not study the sky from afar, they existed within its rhythm. For them, to lose sight of a constellation was to lose the beat of time. In the cave's dark chambers, that rhythm lived forever. If we think of the cave as a kind of mirror universe, then each animal and each constellation reflects one another. The stars above mirrored life below, the creatures below mirrored life above. The artists who painted here were translating between two realms, binding the visible and the infinite together through color and motion. In this communion, art became the language of the cosmos. The tiny cluster of 7 glowing dots in those paintings became a seed of universal awareness. Across millennia, that same formation appears in temples, myths, and poetry. The 7 sisters of the sky, the glowing eyes of the bull, the guiding lights for sailors lost at night, all sprang from this one ancient understanding. The stars of Lascaux never went out, they merely changed form with each generation's imagination. When you imagine lying on the ground outside the cave on a cold winter night, looking upward at the blazing heavens, you might feel the same smallness they felt, and the same wonder. Wind sigh through bare trees, the sound of distant water echoes through the hills, and above it all, the stars burn quietly. Their arrangements seem ancient yet familiar, the same constellations that drew those first artists into dream. You realize that standing beneath the night sky has never changed, it has only deepened in meaning. Inside those caverns, time stood still, and memory became immortal. The torchlight returned the sense that the stars themselves had entered the earth, visiting their human admirers. The artists who painted these visions may have believed they were preserving not stories of animals, but the very breath of the cosmos. Every stroke on the wall was a prayer to continue the eternal dance of light and darkness. And so we walk through these corridors of shadow and stone, finding not primitive art, but philosophy written in pigment. It is not a record of life, it is a reflection of existence. The Lascaux caves remind us that long before math or scripture, humanity already spoke the universal language of wonder. They watched, they remembered, and they recorded with precision that required no telescope at all. Outside the cave, the constellations continue their slow drift through millennia, but within, they remain frozen forever, fixed to the moment when humanity first discovered its reflection in the stars. The paintings stand as portals between earth and sky, proof that we have always belonged to something bigger, something luminous and infinite that guides us through our most ancient fears. To think that a flicker of torchlight among painted walls would begin our entire cosmic story, that somewhere deep within darkness, humans first mapped the heavens not with instruments but with imagination. It was in those moments of silence, when fire met stone and eyes met starlight, that humanity learned to dream beyond the ground. And from that dream, our entire vision of the universe was born. Far to the east of the painted caves of France, beyond the forests that once blanketed Europe, another place rises out of ancient dust. The ground there hums with a silence older than stone, a silence so complete that the wind itself seems to hesitate. When the sunrise spills across the plains of southeastern Turkey, it washes over the buried rings of Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple, raised by hands that had not yet learned to farm. The stones stand like sentinels of a forgotten purpose, whispering through time. Beneath the earth, archaeologists unearthed pillars taller than men, each shaped with precision and adorned with symbols that defy simple meaning. Animals leap across their surfaces: foxes, vultures, serpents, lions, etched with a mastery that suggests generations of memory. But there is more to these carvings than myth or art. The arrangement of the stones themselves hints at design, a geometric order that reflects something celestial. When the first light of dawn cuts across the horizon, certain pillars catch it directly, their faces glowing with warmth while others remain shrouded in shadow. The placement is not random. Each enclosure turns toward specific points in the sky, as if built to follow the sun and stars on their annual path. In this pattern, one begins to glimpse the intentions of the builders. They were watching the heavens, not only worshipping them but encoding their rhythm into the very bones of the earth. Göbekli Tepe was not a settlement. There are no signs of fields, houses, or daily life nearby. It was a sanctuary built by nomads, people who carried their world on their backs, yet constructed something monumental that endured for millennia. Why would those early wanderers devote such effort to raising stones? Perhaps they sought to bind the cycles of heaven into their own transitory existence. The stars above gave meaning to movement. By aligning the temple with their courses, humankind anchored eternity to the soil. The design of the temple rings mirrors the circular progression of celestial time. Each pillar may have represented a star or constellation. Some researchers note that a group of symbols found on one of the stones resembles the pattern of the northern sky around 10,000 BCE, when the constellation Sagittarius marked the region where the sun rose at winter solstice. Others suggest that the vulture stone, with its carved scorpion and bird, depicts a celestial map of the Milky Way's central bulge. In these carvings, the heavens were made visible on Earth. Imagine the scene 12,000 years ago, when the last ice sheet still lingered on distant mountains. Across the rolling plain, groups of hunters and gatherers arrived at this sacred mound. Torches flickered in the night air, casting long shadows between the standing stones. At the center, a circle of pillars surrounded an open space beneath the stars. Ritual chants echoed against the limestone, rising with the wind. As the sun began to rise, light touched the carvings precisely on cue. They knew when and where it would appear. This place was not only a temple, it was a cosmic clock. The people who built Göbekli Tepe carried no written language, but they understood symbols profoundly. They communicated through stone and sky, through the repetition of form and alignment. The twin pillars at the center of each ring towered like human figures, abstract yet commanding, perhaps ancestors, perhaps deities, or perhaps reflections of constellations themselves. Between them, the sunrise framed an eternal doorway. When the sun passed through that opening, a new season began. In those dawn ceremonies, one can imagine the merging of the physical and celestial worlds. The tribes gathered in reverence, tracing the stars' migration as though following the steps of gods. The night had taught them rhythm, the pace at which time breathes, and the temple captured that rhythm forever. In stone they recorded what they had observed for countless generations, that the heavens are predictable, and through that predictability, life finds balance. Every groove and carving at Göbekli Tepe tells of this relationship. The fox, moving swiftly around the base of one pillar, mirrors the flickering light of a certain constellation visible only during a few months of the year. The bird poised above a sphere may symbolically carry the sun across the sky. A scorpion carved deep into limestone recalls the stars of Scorpius, shining along the Milky Way's curve. They turned animals into celestial signs, using familiar forms to describe the unseen. At night, when the fires had burned low and silence returned, those early observers must have lifted their eyes to the same endless dome of stars. Each glimmer marked the passage of stories too ancient to be forgotten. They were not guessing, they were remembering. The positions of the stars corresponded to sacred pillars. The moving heavens reinforced the permanence of their creation. Above, light the eternal wanderer. Below, stone the eternal witness. Together they formed a dialogue across time. In this understanding, Göbekli Tepe was both observatory and offering. It was built to hold communion between the human and the cosmic, between those alive and the vast intelligence of the universe around them. When night ended and the sun returned, its rays traced invisible geometry across the site. Every shadow lengthened at an angle that carried meaning. Each sunrise became an act of revelation. Over centuries, new rings of pillars were built, one over another, each perhaps aligned to new positions of the stars as they slowly shifted due to the precession of the Earth's axis. The builders were adjusting the temple in harmony with the changing sky, a testament to observation over hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. To record such subtle movements required vigilance, patience, and memory across generations. Humanity had begun to measure time on the scale of the cosmos itself. There is a quiet majesty in this act. Without mathematics or instruments, the early peoples of Anatolia tracked the precession of equinoxes, the long, slow wobble of the Earth's orientation that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. They could not know that number, but they could see its effect, carving their understanding into each new circle of stone. The sky turned its great wheel above them, and their temples turned with it. As the world around them changed, the melting of glacier, the greening of valleys, they carried one constant truth: the sky endures. The stars moved, but their patterns remained. Each new generation would learn to read the celestial tapestry anew. The act of aligning stone to star became a way of passing knowledge forward, an inheritance of light. We often imagine progress as invention, but perhaps it began with remembrance. Those nomads preserved secrets of the heavens not in paper or code but in silence, geometry, and devotion. And though time eventually covered the site in dust, burying its splendor beneath hills, the knowledge engraved within it never vanished. The stones slept beneath the soil, awaiting rediscovery, like the stars themselves emerging after dusk. In the stillness of its burial, the world turned and civilizations rose around it: Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, all gazing once more at the same sky, repeating what had been begun at Göbekli Tepe. Its memory fell into myth, transforming into the universal image of the cosmic mountain, a place where heaven and earth touch. The alignment between stars and stones would echo through every succeeding culture, shaping how we built, how we prayed, how we dreamed. Consider the two great central pillars, slender, towering, slightly forward-leaning. Their forms are not random. They are mirror images of one another, as though representing twins or dual forces: light and shadow, life and death, sunrise and sunset. When viewed under the winter sky thousands of years ago, their orientation corresponded with the rising of particular stars near the bright band of the Milky Way. Perhaps they marked celestial gates, portals between the living and the divine. Beneath them lay circular floors polished smooth by centuries of feet, grooves in the stone where rituals repeated endlessly. At night, the people danced in those circles as if tracing the movements of the constellations, their firelit forms revolving in mimicry of cosmic motion. Every gesture, every sound, was part of a symphony aligned to the sky. This union of architecture, astronomy, and spirit gave birth to a rhythm of existence we still follow unknowingly. When we trace the oldest myths of the world, the twin deities of light, the serpent that coils around the world, the vulture that carries souls upward, we find their origin in these stones. The carvings of Göbekli Tepe hold the roots of myth, each animal mapping both the life on Earth and its echo among the stars. Those myths survived because they were truth in symbolic form. They expressed the pattern of the cosmos long before we could describe it scientifically. Each sunrise over the horizon reaffirmed their belief that balance governed all things. The carvings glowed golden for a few moments, then faded again into shadow, as if to remind them that knowledge exists in cycles, not as possession, but as continuous return. They built the temple not to control the heavens, but to belong to them. Theirs was not conquest but participation. In the soft dawn light, the pillars stood like pages of a book no one could yet read. The wind passing between them sounded almost like a hymn. Birds perched on the carved vultures, dust stirred through open spaces. The sight seemed alive with more than silence, it breathed through memory. The same constellations that guided them still rise above us, unbroken by the passage of 12,000 years. Every night we walk beneath their language. When the world finally forgot this temple, its meaning drifted into dreams. Yet even without knowing, later civilizations built echoes of what had stood there. Stonehenge, with its solstice markers, the ziggurats rising toward the sky, the pyramids aligned to Orion, they are all fragments of that primary revelation born on this Anatolian hill. The memory of alignment runs in deep human blood. The builders of Göbekli Tepe did not leave behind gold or weapons. Their legacy was the union of matter and mystery. They had looked up and realized that the same laws governing the stars governed themselves. They carved that understanding into pillars smooth, enduring, immovable. Theirs was the art of eternity, crafted not for the gods alone but for the continuity of awareness. When we stand there today, watching twilight settle over the hills, we witness time folded back upon itself. The stones, though silent, still perform their old duty. As the night deepens, the same stars begin to appear one by one. They rise in the same order, glowing above the same horizon those ancient hands once traced. In that moment, the boundary between now and then disappears. Perhaps the most haunting thought is that they knew this connection would outlive them. They built not for their generation, but for all to come. In the rising stars, they saw immortality. In aligning stone to sky, they offered a message that would last as long as both endured. And so far, it has. The wind over Göbekli Tepe carries more than dust, it carries echoes of chants, of awe, of knowledge still resonant. It is a voice repeating across 12 millennia, whispering that the heavens were never outside of us, they were reflected within. Those early architects remind us that to observe the cosmos is to remember what we are made of, the same light, the same dust, the same desire to understand. To gaze upon those pillars today is to feel the same silence that once surrounded the first astronomers. There is a weight to it, not of grief, but of timelessness. The very stones seem aware, patient, waiting for the cycle to complete. Each sunset and sunrise renew the same lesson: everything that returns to the earth also returns to the stars. Their legacy did not vanish. It simply evolved. The science we call astronomy began here, not in formulae or abstraction, but in awe. The awe of standing beneath infinity and daring to measure it with stone. The awe of realizing that the same stars guiding the hunter's path could also mark the turning of the soul. It was the beginning of our consciousness of connection. As the moon rises above the ruined rings tonight, it casts silver light upon carvings worn by 10,000 winters. But still they gleam faintly, as though remembering firelight. The scorpion, the fox, the bird, all emerge from shadow once more. The old alignment awakens again, and for a few heartbeats, the pillars of Göbekli Tepe come alive with the memory of the cosmos. And now, as we stand in the modern night, surrounded by technology and noise, we are still gazing upward at the same sky. We are still reading the same ancient map drawn not in ink but in light. What began in those caves and temples continues in us. Every time we lift our eyes to the stars, we repeat the oldest act of humanity: we seek our reflection in the infinite. When humans learn to watch the sky with pattern and purpose, the stars ceased to be a mystery alone, they became a map of survival. The heavens marked not only wonder but time itself, turning slowly across the great dome above the plains. With each returning constellation, the people of early ages measured the rhythm of their existence. The world moved not in chaos but in cycles, and within those cycles, they found peace. From the sacred circles of Göbekli Tepe, knowledge radiated outward like sunlight filtering through fog. Everywhere humanity wandered, that awareness followed. The same eyes that once traced the carvings of foxes and scorpions now looked up to follow Sirius, Orion, and the slow dance of the moon. In those steady orbits, they saw repetition and reliability, a cosmic memory older than language. They understood that the stars were not random, they were clocks whose ticking spanned centuries. The nightly motion of constellations gave rhythm to life the way heartbeat gives rhythm to breath. Each rise and setting foretold the seasons, the migrations, the floods. While the earth changed around them, the heavens stayed constant, and from that constancy came trust. When the people began to farm, this celestial knowledge became their most powerful companion. The rise of certain stars warned of coming rains or droughts, the proper time to plant or harvest. They no longer needed to wander as their forebears had. The sky told them when to sow the grain that would feed their children and when water would return to the rivers. The universe itself had become their calendar. The brightest of these guides was Sirius, the star of returning water. Each year, its first appearance before dawn corresponded with the flooding of the great river valleys. In the distant deserts where life depended on the rhythm of the Nile, this star became the messenger of renewal. People waited for it in silence through long nights, knowing that with its light, the land would live again. Across the continents, the pattern repeated. In the hills of Mesopotamia, farmers noted the rising of constellations to measure the seasons. In valleys of Africa, hunters marked the return of star clusters that meant migrations would begin. The heavens became a book read through the eyes, each page unfolding in patient cycles. The story was universal because the stars belonged to no one and to everyone. Far beyond memory, the moon too became a companion in this language of time. Its phases ordered ritual and rest, dream and duty. Each shift from crescent to crescent echoed the renewal of all living things. When our ancestors began carving marks on bones to count the days between full moons, they were not simply counting, they were mapping the pulse of existence itself. Over centuries, the night became humanity's great teacher. The rotation of planets and the slow shift of constellations told a silent story of cause and consequence. Time was no longer merely experienced, it was understood. Every sunrise, every star, every shadow had meaning. The first priests were not rulers, but observers of the heavens, keepers of celestial memory who ensured no one forgot when the earth would turn again. It was this awareness that bound community together. A tribe that could predict the rains could survive. A people who knew when the river would rise could prosper. And so, knowledge of the skies became sacred. The elders would gather their people at night, pointing to patterns above while the flames cast warm halos around their faces. To learn the heavens was to inherit power, not of conquest, but of understanding. Around each fire, a story was told not only in mythic form but in observation. A serpent swallowing its own tail may have symbolized the recurring nature of the seasons. The hunter chasing the beast across the stars marked the eternal pursuit of light through darkness. Every myth hid an instruction, every tale carried direction. Stories became code, binding the cycles of heaven to human memory. Even the shadows cast by the sun by day carried messages. A stick planted in the ground revealed how far the shadow stretched, how its length changed with each season. From these small acts came primitive sundials, born not of invention but of noticing. Humanity began to measure both space and time with the precision that would lead, much later, to science. The ancient instruments of survival were made from nothing but curiosity and sky. Generations learned that the length of shadows could foretell the shortest and longest days, marking solstices without the need for tools. Sunlight became a guide as sure as starlight. By tracing the path of the rising and setting sun across the horizon, they watched the Earth's slow tilt, understanding intuitively the concept of movement within stillness. Our calendar was carved not on stone but in light. In many places, the stars and the sun became the spine of ritual. Festivals aligned to equinoxes and solstices carried memory forward through celebration. At the turning of the year, fires were lit to mirror the renewal of light. Dances imitated the wander of the planets. Songs rose from the fields in honor of the sky that taught them when to begin again. The heavens had become both teacher and participant in the cycle of human gratitude. This cosmic rhythm was not worshipped out of fear but from recognition. The people understood that they lived within the same breathing body as the stars. Everything that grew, moved, or died was governed by the same rhythm that turned the constellations. To live in harmony with that rhythm was to live rightly. The earliest concept of balance between day and night, between birth and decay was written by the sky. At night, the watchers built marker stones set in a row, cairns raised toward the horizon, or posts driven into the earth to track the returning of certain stars. Over generations, these markers grew into observatories not meant for dwelling but for alignment. From Nabta Playa in the deserts of Africa to the mounds that dotted the European countryside, each served as a calendar written in shadow and light. Humanity was learning to marry memory with matter. Where once Göbekli Tepe aligned heavens to ritual, the new builders aligned heavens to time. With stone and patience, they built circular monuments that captured sunlight at specific days of the year. When the sun rose through their gateways, the people knew the cycle had turned. Their survival depended not only on understanding the stars but on the ability to anticipate the Earth's own heartbeat. The very act of waiting for light became sacred. The people would gather before dawn, the horizon whispering with wind, their hearts steady. Then it came a shaft of brilliance cutting between pillars of stone, flooding a chamber with gold. In that instant, the invisible clock of the planet confirmed its promise. The world was renewed, and time itself seemed to breathe again. No written language was more precise than this interplay of stars and stone. Across landscapes, generations connected through shared observation. The night sky united distant tribes with a single truth: they all lived beneath the same celestial clock. Even separated by deserts and oceans, they measured time in identical rhythms. The universe had become humanity's first calendar, synchronized by wonder. Some of the earliest astronomical records were not written on parchment but on memory. The elders passed down knowledge through chant, rhythm, and repetition. The coming of certain constellations became verses, the return of light a refrain. In those songs were seasons, in those stories the precise timing of planting, migration, birth. Each voice carried not only myth but mathematics disguised as story. There is beauty in imagining this quiet intelligence. No one owned it, no one declared discovery. Knowledge was not accumulation but participation. The people observed the world not to dominate it but to converse with it. Each new dawn was an answer, each night another question. They were learning the language of creation line by line, constellation by constellation. In time, stone circles spread across continents, each serving as its community's clock. Some aligned with solstices, others with the rising of certain stars. Entire villages shaped their lives around the heavens' choreography. When the first builders dragged massive stones over miles of earth to build circles like Stonehenge, they were continuing a tradition that began in the minds of sky watchers millennia earlier. Those monuments did not rise in isolation, they were the inevitable expression of generations who learned the patience of light. Every motion of the sun inspired a marker. Every shadow lengthened and returned in perfect rhythm, and people began to trust the future because they could measure it. That trust built civilization. Through understanding the sky, humanity gained mastery over time itself. The ability to predict the coming of rains, to plan festivals, to track harvests transformed mere survival into planning, and planning into culture. The cosmos gave meaning to waiting. Each season's arrival became a kind of proof that the universe could be known, that order underpinned existence. Even the night's darkness taught consistency. The moon would wax and wane with such precision that humans began to measure smaller cycles within larger ones. The stars offered long rhythms, the moon shorter ones. Together they wove a pattern of days and years. Layer by layer, observation became the foundation of thought, and thought became ritual. It was this joining of attention and reverence that shaped the human spirit. The act of looking upward night after night instilled patience. To watch the heavens was to learn humility, for the sky demanded no offerings, only awareness. It rewarded observation with understanding, reminding humanity that truth revealed itself only through waiting. By the time oral wisdom turned into writing, the language of the sky was already embedded deep within. The earliest calendars inscribed on clay tablets and temple walls were continuations of that ancient pattern. Lines drawn through stars became constellations, constellations became mythology, and mythology guided behavior. Through it all, time remained sacred because it was measurable yet untouchable. And though centuries separated the cave painters of Lascaux from the builders of the first cities, both stared at the same heavens. The constellations shifted slightly, the stories changed names, but their function remained anchors for humanity's sense of continuity. The cosmos had become communication, the oldest conversation ever begun, still ongoing, still unending. Across grasslands and deserts, small groups gathered night after night to look upward. Their breath condensed in the cold, smoke twisting from fires as they murmured the names of stars. Even before science, before belief hardened into religion, there was this moment of unity. To know the stars was to stand in eternity for a moment, aware of the grand order that cradled existence. The ancestors who built clocks from starlight were not mere observers but poets of geometry. Every motion meant something. The march of Orion through winter skies, the return of the morning star before dawn, all folded into a rhythm that sustained both the body and the soul. The harmony between celestial motion and human awareness became the ultimate truth: we move because the heavens move. When we gaze upward now, we rarely see the calendar hidden in the constellations, but it remains there. The same signals that guided our ancestors still pulse across the sky. To watch them now is to feel their patience, their gentle genius whispering through the abyss. They did not count years, they counted returns. Every sunrise, every moonrise, every season was a word in an endless cosmic hymn. And in that hymn, humanity found purpose. By reading the sky, they learned to live with the earth. By aligning life to the stars, they discovered the rhythm of balance. It was never about control, it was about harmony. Time, stars, and humanity each reflected within the other, joined in a single act of remembrance older than all civilization. Even now, in the soft silence between twilight and night, one can feel the echo of that ancient awareness. The stars emerge as they always have, unchanging in their slow turn. Somewhere within that endless movement lies the same truth our ancestors once saw by the fire, that to measure the sky is to measure ourselves, and in doing so, to remember that everything, every breath, every shadow is part of one eternal returning. From the moment people began aligning stones to the heavens, the shape of human settlements and sacred spaces changed forever. The landscape became a canvas for astronomical precision, each massive block of stone an anchor for light and shadow. These were not mere monuments, they were observatories, tuned to the rhythms of the Earth's rotation and the slow turning of the sky. Long before the pyramids and ziggurats, humans carried boulders across vast distances to set them upright in deliberate formations. These great circles and avenues of stone often stood in places where the land fell open to a wide horizon. The position of each within the structure was exact, creating visual corridors to catch the sun at specific moments of the year. These were the first instruments of architecture designed to track time. When dawn broke at the solstices, sunlight spilled through these ancient gateways with surgical precision. Crowds would gather in the chill of morning, watching as the first beams struck a chosen stone or illuminated a hidden mark. The effect was both practical and sacred. The watchers knew the seasons had turned, and they felt the presence of a cosmic order that bound the world together. One of the oldest of these observatories lies in the remote desert of southern Egypt, at Nabta Playa. Long before Stonehenge, people here carved standing stones into alignments that matched the summer solstice sunrise. This moment was critical not for ceremony alone, but because it heralded the coming of the monsoon rains. To miss this timing could mean famine, to meet it meant survival. In the soft heat of dawn at Nabta Playa, the wind moves gently over the stones. Shadows stretch toward the horizon, tracing patterns as the sun climbs higher. For the ancient people who gathered here, this was their compass and clock in one. They did not read numbers, they read light. In the shifting glow across rock, they heard the quiet speech of the universe. Across Europe, other people raised their own circles, some of wood, many of stone, each uniquely attuned to local skies. These were not crude constructions. Stones weighing tons were shaped and placed with geometrical precision, creating alignments that would remain true for generations. To shift even a single pillar by hand was a colossal effort, yet entire communities lent their strength. The reason was simple: the alignment itself was life-giving. Nowhere does this speak more clearly than at Stonehenge. Its horseshoe of towering trilithons frames the midsummer sunrise so perfectly that sunlight shoots straight through the center, striking the heel stone beyond. On the opposite side of the year, at midwinter sunset, the same structure captures the waning sun in reverse. This symmetry in stone turned the passage of the seasons into a living ritual, visible to all who stood within its embrace. The people who built it may not have left written accounts, but Stonehenge itself is their record, a book in stone that still works today. Standing there in the quiet hours before sunrise, one feels the same anticipation those ancient watchers felt. When the light finally spills through that sacred gap, it feels less like the arrival of the sun and more like a doorway opening. Many of these prehistoric observatories share the same feature, an emphasis on the horizon. The builders understood that the rising and setting points of the sun and certain bright stars shift over the year. By marking these points with stones, they could measure time with an accuracy surprising for the age. This required not only observation, but an inherited understanding passed through generations dedicated to the slow, patient work of watching. Some observatories were even more ambitious, tracking the moon's complex cycle over 18.5 years. At sites like Callanish in Scotland, rows of stones extend outward like the spokes of a huge wheel, marking where the moon would rise and set at its extreme positions. Such knowledge demanded centuries of careful recording, proof of a commitment to the sky that has almost no equivalent today. The builders knew these places would outlast them. That was the point. By embedding the movement of the heavens into massive, immovable structures, they guaranteed that the sky's memory would endure even if their own did not. The stones would keep the calendar for all who came after, speaking a language of light and shadow to anyone patient enough to read it. At each turning of the seasons, the observatories became theaters where the cosmos played out its most dependable events. Sunlight and moonlight choreographed a performance that had been repeated for countless millennia. The people came not only to witness but to participate, to renew the bond between their world and the vast one above it. In some cultures, the observatories were not isolated structures but part of a wider ceremonial landscape. Pathways, burial mounds, and smaller stone rings surrounded them, all aligned to key celestial events. The act of approaching the central circle became a journey through layers of cosmic meaning. Each step brought the participant closer to the heart of the relationship between earth and sky. The stone alignments also offered a way to predict future events, especially eclipses. In places where both the sun and moon were tracked with great care, the regular recurrence of these alignments revealed patterns. Though they explained them through myth, the people nonetheless knew when such rare occurrences were coming. An eclipse might be feared as an omen, but it was an omen they could foresee. Minor stones, often overlooked by modern visitors, sometimes served as star markers, pointing to the rising of bright stars such as Aldebaran, Arcturus, or Rigel at specific times of year. These night markers complemented the day's solar alignments, creating a full celestial clock that functioned both day and night. In this way, the observatories were not passive, they were living instruments. There is a kind of humility in the precision of these works. Without the ability to command the seasons, humans learned to move to their rhythm. By fixing their architecture to forces far greater than themselves, they declared their place within the vast design. The stone circles were statements of belonging to the land, the sky, and to time itself. In visiting these sites today, it is easy to see only the ruins. Yet if one stands in them at the right moment on the solstice, the equinox, or under a particular full moon, suddenly the stones come alive again. The angles sharpen, the horizon aligns, and for a few minutes the present falls away. You are there, in the deep past, watching the same beam of light fall into place as it has for thousands of years. The ingenuity seen in these prehistoric observatories was born of patience. Generations of careful watching, of noting the smallest shift on the horizon, allowed such precision. This was science in its rawest form, driven not by technology, but by direct intimacy with the movements of the natural world. From Africa to Europe, from the plains of Asia to the islands of the Pacific, ancient builders left similar signatures in their landscapes. The materials changed: wood, stone, earth, but the purpose remained, to anchor the cycles of the sky so that the people could live in step with them. The method was as much spiritual as practical, blending observation with reverence. It is tempting to think these observatories were the work of specialists alone, but their scale suggests entire communities participated. They carried stones together, watched together, celebrated together. The passing of time was a shared reality, felt as keenly as hunger or thirst. And because it was shared, it became identity. Even after many of these places fell into disuse, their orientations continued to influence local traditions. Paths, villages, and later religious sites were sometimes built on the same alignments, preserving the invisible lines drawn across the earth by their ancient makers. The landscape remembers in ways we often forget. To stand within such a stone circle at night is to feel the intent of its builders pressing in from ages past. The arc of the horizon cradles you, the stones rise like frozen notes of a song that only repeats once a year. The stars wheel above in their measured arcs, each one returning exactly when they promised. In the cold light, the meaning returns. These were places where humanity learned to trust the sky. The observatories remind us that before we measured time with machines, we measured it with our bodies by the angle of shadow, the position of stars, the length of days. The stones are not relics of a primitive age, they are proof of an intelligence that valued its relationship to the cosmos above all. That value is carved into their placement, waiting for us to notice. Through them, the age-old dialogue between humanity and the heavens is still ongoing. While the world has changed endlessly since they were built, the sun still rises in the same places, the moon still dances in its cycle, the stars still slip along the horizon at their appointed times. The stones still catch that light, still frame that movement, still hold the calendar of the earth in their silent embrace. These prehistoric observatories endure because they are more than structures, they are agreements between land, sky, and people. They declare that we are participants in the cycles, not masters of them. In a way, they are promises that as long as the sun rises and the stars return, so too will our connection to their rhythm. As the great stone observatories evolved, humanity began to discover something even more profound, that light itself could speak. Through its angles, its reflections, and its movement, sunlight and starlight became messages written across architecture. The builders had learned not only to align with the heavens, but to converse with them, turning sacred structures into instruments of illumination. At dawn or dusk, when the world softened into silence, the temples awoke. Rays of sunlight slid through narrow corridors or small window slits, striking exact points deep within the chambers. To the untrained eye it seemed a miracle, a sudden blaze of gold piercing the darkness, but to those who built it, it was the fulfillment of careful design. The play of light and shadow marked celestial events more precisely than any spoken calendar. Inside these ancient sanctuaries, light became sacred geometry. At Newgrange in Ireland, a massive mound older than Stonehenge, a single beam of the winter solstice sun enters through a small opening only once each year. It travels down a long passageway to illuminate a stone basin deep inside. For 17 minutes, the cold interior glows with golden warmth, as though the sky itself had been invited to step inside the earth. When the light fades, darkness returns until the cycle renews. For the people who gathered outside, waiting in the cold dawn, this moment was not a performance, it was a promise. The sun's return confirmed that winter's grip would loosen. The ancient architects had captured hope itself in stone, ensuring that each generation could witness rebirth when their need was greatest. Within that golden hour, humanity experienced both astronomy and faith intertwined. Elsewhere, similar miracles took place. Across the seas, in Egypt's vast temples, shafts of sunlight reached into the sanctuaries on precise days of the year. At Abu Simbel, sunlight shines directly on the statues of Ramses and the gods twice each year, one at his coronation date and another at his presumed birthday. Between those moments, the sanctuary rests in shadow, as if dreaming of illumination. The builders measured eternity in inches of light. This mastery of illumination was more than artistic beauty, it was cosmic synchronization. The builders understood that light moves with divine precision. By linking sunlight to the design of temples, they connected earthly power to celestial order. The ruler became a reflection of the sun, his temple an extension of its movement. Light and shadow were no longer opposites, they were language and silence, day and night conversing within human creation. Inside these chambers, shadow carried as much meaning as light. As the sun moved higher, patterns of darkness drifted across carvings to reveal new forms. A serpent etched into stone might appear coiled by morning and stretched by noon. Symbols changed under light's touch, turning each day into a living story. The walls became a moving text, written not with tools but with time itself. Imagine standing within one of those ancient halls as morning breaks. The air is cool, humming faintly with stillness. Only a narrow slit above lets daylight in. Then, as the sun climbs, a single ray slices downward, striking a carved symbol long veiled in darkness. Priests murmur softly, this is the moment the ancestors foretold, the time when heaven touches earth. For a brief span, the invisible becomes seen, and everyone present witnesses creation replaying itself. These experiences were not superstition, they were deliberate acts of observation. Each interaction between light and structure reflected centuries of tuning, as if entire civilizations had become watchmakers of the cosmos. Their instruments were vast, but their goal was the same: to measure the heartbeat of the universe, to feel aligned with forces beyond human reach. Even the smallest structures carried this understanding. A hole carved into rock might frame the sunrise on a specific morning. A thin pillar might throw a shadow that reached exactly to a marked stone. These intimate interactions between sunlight and human intention revealed a subtle precision, evidence of minds that perceived the world as a single, breathing organism of pattern. In many cultures, the manipulation of light was also symbolic rebirth. When sunlight pierced the heart of darkness, it echoed the birth of the world from chaos. Temples became wombs of light, caves of renewal where creation repeated itself in measured rhythm. Those who stood within that illumination felt themselves briefly inside the first morning of time, touched by the same breath that formed the stars. Over centuries, this union of architecture and astronomy deepened. Builders realized that the angle of light could not only signal seasons but also predict equinoxes and solstices far in advance. The interplay of sunlight through corridors acted as an ancient calendar, more precise than imagination alone. These stone instruments, powered by the sky itself, required no maintenance, only continued awe. Shadow too became prophecy. By marking where darkness reached on specific days, early astronomers could anticipate the shift of seasons months before it arrived. Even at midday, when the sun stood highest, its light traced delicate movements along the ground that spoke of coming changes. People followed these signs with reverence, as though decoding a message written directly by the universe. In places of ritual, this cosmic choreography shaped human emotion. Festivals gathered around the moments when light returned to the heart of temples, when dawn first touched an altar after months of shadow. Dancers and singers greeted the light as kin. They were not asking for salvation, they were celebrating reunion. For a brief time, heaven and earth shared the same rhythm, and everything felt whole again. The mastery of light also shaped myth. In Egypt, the sun goddess' daily journey mirrored the path of light through temple corridors. At dawn he was the newborn child, rising between horizons. By midday he ruled in strength, his chariot blazing over the sky. By evening he sank into darkness, descending into the underworld to be reborn. The temple reflected this arc perfectly, turning myth into experience for all who entered. Elsewhere, in the Americas and Asia, pyramids and shrines achieved similar feats. At Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan displays a descending serpent of light during the equinox. Triangular shadows ripple along the staircase, forming the illusion of a living snake crawling down the structure. The sun and architecture collaborate seamlessly, proving that even thousands of years apart, humans sought the same wonder: the union of matter and radiance. These were not coincidences of architecture but revelations of perception. The sky spoke through angles, and humanity learned to respond through design. To hold sunlight for a few minutes in a dark chamber was to prove mastery over the passage of time. It was to touch eternity and feel the heartbeat of the solar cycle pass through stone. Each temple, Each monument became its own dialogue with the cosmos. Some captured starlight instead. In certain mountain shrines, narrow openings framed the appearance of specific stars at particular times of year. When that tiny point of light appeared, a new season began. The people had built not mere places of worship but tools of alignment, bridges between worlds both seen and unseen. There is a quiet poetry in this, structures of silence built for light that never stays. The builders knew that illumination was fleeting, that it would vanish moments after it appeared. Perhaps that was the meaning all along, that even transient light is enough to confirm eternity. That life's beauty lies in its brief alignment with something infinite. As centuries passed, light became language. Priests and astronomers learned to calculate the angles that would deliver illumination precisely on holy days. Temples turned into celestial calendars whose stones performed silent ritual year after year, even as new generations came and went. The builders had achieved what all people crave: to speak with time itself and to be heard in return. When darkness fell, these observatories did not slumber. They waited calmly for moonlight to replace the sun's touch. The glow of the full moon through temple corridors brought gentler revelations. Its silver light traced the same paths more softly, wrapping the stones in dreamlike hues. People understood this duality: sunlight revealed strength, moonlight revealed reflection. Both were equal, both essential. The night sky turned every shadow into design. Stars reflected in sacred pools, their shimmering surfaces serving as mirrors of the heavens. In some places, architects even built artificial ponds precisely to capture these reflections, so the celestial sphere appeared complete beneath the earth. Standing before them under silence, one could feel suspended between realities above and below, unified in one boundless image. Every beam of light, every passing shadow, became an act of communication. To the ancient builders, this interplay was evidence that they lived within the breath of a divine intelligence. They did not worship the sun or the stars as gods distinct from themselves; they saw them as facets of the same order that moved through all things. The light between temple stones was their proof of connection. To modern eyes, much of this may seem ritualistic. But to those ancient minds, it was empirical truth. The return of light through the same slit each year was proof that the cosmos worked reliably, that the world had meaning. Hope was measurable. Time was visible. The infinite, for an instant, could be touched. Even now, when we stand in these ruins and see sunlight fall across carvings just as it did millennia ago, the feeling remains. For a moment, everything aligns. The same photons that once touched the faces of ancient observers now cross our own. We share their wonder, their stillness, their knowing silence. The stones may have lost their priests, but not their purpose. Light and shadow continue their eternal performance, speaking the same language to anyone patient enough to listen. In that shimmering connection between sun, stone, and soul, humanity finds again its first understanding that the universe does not hide meaning, it reveals it in motion, moment by moment, beam by beam. In the cold reaches of the northern world, where the nights stretch long and the stars veil the sky like frost, ancient people continue the dialogue their ancestors began. They looked upward through endless winters, their breath mingling with the aurora, finding meaning in constellations seen through icy air. These forgotten sky maps of the north carried a quiet wisdom born not from desert fires or tropical dawns, but from silence, endurance, and a profound intimacy with the polar heavens. When darkness ruled for months at a time, light became the most precious of all treasures. The stars were no longer distant, they were companions, flickering guides above the endless tundra. To the people who lived where the sun barely climbed, the constellations served not only as timekeepers but as living myths, guiding migration, storytelling, even the rhythm of survival. In the glow of the Arctic night, the sky was both clock and scripture. They watched how certain stars circled the heavens without ever setting. Around the invisible pole, the constellations circled endlessly, never slipping below the horizon. To these early astronomers, this eternal rotation became a symbol of the sole time without beginning or end. The pole star, unflinching in its place, became the axis of all motion, the still heart about which creation revolved. The North Star, steady and eternal, was their anchor. Unlike the wandering stars that rose and fell, this one remained, unmoving, patient. For countless generations it guided travelers across featureless snow and sea. Hunters learned to follow its position to find their way home through storms. It became the flame of permanence in a world that turned endlessly. Around that fixed light, mythology spun its web. Many tribes told of a celestial tree growing from the earth to pierce the sky, its roots sinking into the world and its crown touching the pole star. It was the world's spine, the bridge between realms. The northern sky offered them proof that permanence existed even in chaos, that there was a center to life's spiral. Across Europe, Asia, and the northern seas, similar myths emerged independently. The Sami of Lapland spoke of the world pillar reaching upward through heaven, around which the stars revolved. In Eurasian legends, this pillar sometimes took the form of a bear, king of the skies, walking eternally around its invisible tether. The constellations of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor carved this myth in light, never fading from their celestial dance. Long nights allowed the watchers time to know the stars intimately. Each minor flicker held meaning. The people charted not only constellations, but subtle changes in brightness, the occasional visitor blazing across the void. When a comet appeared, it was recorded not with writing but in story. Its movement from one constellation to another became a tale of wanderers and spirits, ensuring that even rare celestial events lived on. Winter after winter, this oral astronomy passed through generations. Hunters whispered guidance to their children, follow the arc of the bear to find safety, measure the moon's tilt to know when ice will soften, count the days between the rising of the morning star and the first thaw. They lived by observation, by memory, by repetition of cycles so ancient they felt inevitable. In the forests of prehistory, the constellations were drawn not with ink but with light filtered through branches. The canopy opened only in patches, revealing fragments of sky like windows into eternity. Over time, people learned to map the heavens through familiar silhouettes. The shapes of mountains, lakes, and animal migrations on the ground mirrored patterns of the stars above, teaching them that heaven and earth shared design. At certain times of year, the northern lights would descend, painting the night with curtains of green and violet fire. To those early sky watchers, this was not mere spectacle but revelation. The light seemed alive, swirling like spirits across the dark. They believed ancestors moved in those colors, their souls dancing close to the living world before fading again into the void. When the aurora sang its silent music, people gathered in awe. Voices were hushed, fires burned low. They believed that noise or laughter might disturb the spirits in their luminous dance. Within that silence they entered communion not of fear but reverence. For a few moments, heaven was no longer distant. It shimmered in motion above them, whispering of unseen realms beyond the stars. This reverence shaped their understanding of existence. The North taught patience a slow awareness of change. Unlike lands where day and night exchanged swiftly, here light and darkness lived in long conversations. The watchers learned to read subtle gradients, the faint glow at noon in midwinter, the long twilight that refused to die in summer. Such endurance bred a different intelligence, one that measured beauty not in brightness, but in endurance. When agriculture spread into these latitudes, the stars became the single stable compass amid seasons of darkness. The return of certain constellations above the horizon signaled that soil would thaw, rivers would break, and the sun would rise again. The people learned to wait for star patterns that vanished months before, their reappearance promising the turning of the earth toward warmth. Some carved these patterns into wood or bone, leaving behind maps of the invisible. Archaeologists later uncovered discs etched with concentric rings and groups of dots, likely depicting known constellations. These carvings, now weathered and ancient, echo the simplicity of those early observers' tiny records of the infinite held within fragile hands. The message in these artifacts is universal. Even in places of endless cold, humanity sought connection, meaning, orientation. Their drawings were not just functional maps, they were expressions of belonging to something vast and knowable. The sky's geography consoled them against the uncertainty of wind and darkness. Among the stars of the far north, they saw more than navigation, they saw morality, memory, and fate. The sudden blaze of a meteor was an ancestor's signal. The dimming of a known star warned that the season of scarcity approached. To read the night was to listen to wisdom older than tribes, older than the Earth's own cities yet to come. In the Baltic regions, constellations carried human shapes, heroes, lovers, guardians frozen in perpetual twilight. Their stories reminded listeners of endurance and humility, of how the sky welcomed those who kept watch faithfully. The myths were lessons disguised as poetry. Above every frozen lake, the same shimmering patterns encouraged those below to continue through the long winter night. Further west, ancient Britons who built stone circles also gazed toward the pole. Some stones align not with the sun but with the northern constellations, marking their rotation through the seasons. This alignment reinforced their awareness that even the stars which never set could be used to count time. Through those unending circles of light, they learned the secrets of infinity. On clear nights, far from firelight, the Milky Way glowed like a ghostly path across the sky. To many it was the road of souls, leading from the mortal realm to the dwellings of eternal flame. Travelers who lost their way used the band to find direction, shamans used it as vision, a trail into other worlds during trance. The galaxy above mirrored the rivers below, flowing eternally between the seen and the unseen. Even at the edge of the world, the celestial knowledge matured. Arctic people stacked stones into waypoints called inuksut, standing figures guiding travelers through desolate landscapes. Their forms echoed uprights of ancient observatories and symbolized human presence within the wilderness. Each one pointed the way by land, but also mirrored the constant guidance of stars above, silent, enduring, compassionate. Across all these northern lands, the art of observation became emotion made visible. The people did not separate science from spirituality, measurement from myth. When they looked at the stars, they saw reflections of themselves. Their myths were astronomy painted in metaphor, and their astronomy was myth shaped by math of the heart. Long after these early cultures faded, echoes of their celestial devotion persisted in later civilizations. The Norse spoke of Yggdrasil, the world tree connecting all realms. Its highest branch touched the pole star, while its roots sank into hidden worlds. The eternal rotation of the heavens around this divine axis preserved ancient memories of the polar pillar once observed by those before them. To live beneath such a sky was to accept humility. The vast dome above stretched unbroken from horizon to horizon, indifferent yet intimate. Every person who looked up saw the same patterns that their ancestors once traced. Each night became a ceremony of remembrance, each star, a glowing heartbeat whispering that nothing is ever truly lost. When clouds covered the heavens, people would remember from memory alone, reciting constellations aloud to keep the knowledge alive. Their voices carried the stars even through storms. The act of naming constellations preserved the sense of order, reaffirming that above the veil, the same eternal lights burned steadfast. The cold heavens shaped a culture of endurance, where faith in the returning sun was born from generations of patience. The people of these latitudes knew what darkness meant, knew its depth, so their joy at the return of light was unmatched anywhere else. To see the sun climb again after long absence was to witness resurrection itself, a truth echoed in myth, song, and silence. All over the north, carvings of spirals and circles appeared on stones facing west or north, suggesting the motion of celestial rotation. The builders of megaliths understood this dance of the pole star even before compasses existed. In their geometry lived the quiet assurance that rotation was constancy, not confusion. Even after the passage of thousands of years, the North's ancient watchers would recognize their own wisdom in ours. Sailors navigating at night still look to the pole star. Astronomers still trace the circular drift of constellations around the pole. The lessons written in the polar heavens remain unchanged because the sky itself remains unchanged. Their knowledge was born not of conquest but companionship. They did not seek to master the stars, they learned to travel with them, to rest when they sank low, to rise when they returned. Above them shone not distant fires, but familiar faces. Each star was a doorway, a friend, a whisper from eternity that the world was still in motion. And so the forgotten sky maps of the north remind us that the story of the cosmos is also the story of endurance. In their silence, through their patient watching, early humans found meaning not only in the predictable turn of the heavens but in their own reflection upon it. To look upward in the unending night was to touch time and to be comforted by its constancy. When early humans looked at the stars, they were not only measuring time, they were measuring themselves. In the silent dialogue between sky and mind, something extraordinary awakened. Wonder became reflection. Curiosity became consciousness. The cosmos was no longer an external spectacle, it was a mirror, a vast and glittering canvas on which humanity first recognized its own awareness. The realization came slowly, like dawn breaking over centuries. Watching the heavens required patience, and patience taught introspection. The same capacity that could notice stars reappearing over seasons could also notice thoughts returning in the mind. Observation turned inward as well as outward. The universe introduced humanity to the idea of reflection, the first spark of a soul aware of itself. To watch the stars was to experience humility. The night sky dwarfed every village, every campfire, every ambition. Yet within that vastness, humans found comfort, not fear. They saw that their smallness was part of something immeasurable, that life was a thread woven into cosmic fabric. The stars called not for dominance but for dialogue. And by listening, humanity discovered meaning. The mind became a universe within a universe. Thoughts moved like constellations, patterns of lights across darkness, forming connections where none had seen before. Perhaps this was how myth began, as human beings projected their inner order onto the outer infinity, crafting stories that turned perception into poetry. The cosmos outside began to resemble the inner sky of memory and dream. Night after night, people gathered around fires to speak of these patterns. Every story told beneath the stars was born from the same realization that awareness itself was a kind of light. They understood that consciousness reflected cosmic rhythm. Just as the sun rose and fell, thoughts emerged and faded. Just as seasons turned with precision, emotions followed cycles of loss and renewal. The human spirit mirrored heaven's design. Over generations, this connection deepened until it shaped every part of life. The sky became teacher, philosopher, and muse. Each returning star taught persistence. Each eclipse taught impermanence. From observing the heavens, humans learned compassion, patience, memory, and reverence, transforming survival into understanding. Even fear took on a sacred role. The darkness between stars was not emptiness, it was mystery. In that space where light could not reach, imagination thrived. People peered into the void and filled it with stories, finding creation in absence. The unknown became the womb of meaning. Through facing it, they defined themselves. Underneath this awakening, there was something more profound than myth, an emerging cosmic mind. Communities across the world, separated by oceans and millennia, began reaching identical insights. They all saw order in the universe and sought their place within it. This shared recognition bound humanity in a network of imagination, long before trade or language connected them. From caves to temples, the same question echoed: why are we here, and what are we a part of? The stars did not answer with words, yet their silence was eloquent. Their regular return assured people that existence followed law, not chaos. That law, this blueprint of pattern and harmony, awakened morality. People began imitating the sky, striving for constancy, seeking balance, creating order in themselves. When the first temples rose toward heaven, they were not towers of aspiration but reflections of that inner geometry. The symmetry of their walls, the alignment of their stones, mirrored the order they saw above. In copying the heavens, humanity learned the virtue of structure, the beauty of proportion. Civilization was born from remembering the sky. The awakening of the cosmic mind continued in art. Cave paintings evolved into symbols, symbols into story. Every animal drawn, every spiral carved, was both memory and meditation. These creations bridged the visible and the invisible, allowing humanity to feel that the world of ideas was just as real as the world of matter. The imagination became the second sky. This expansion of thought changed the substance of daily life. Fire was no longer simply warmth, it was the miniature sun, the source of creation within reach. Water mirrored the stars, turning each pond into a window into infinity. Stones and bones became tools not only for hunting but for meaning, carved with shapes linking Earth to constellations. Each object was infused with an order that joined spirit to cosmos. Something unusual happened when humans began naming the stars. The very act of naming endowed the heavens with intimacy. To call a constellation by name was to declare relationship, to bridge distance. The cosmos, once cold and unreachable, became a companion. The human voice echoed upward, and even in its smallness, it carried significance. This relationship between speech and creation would later form the root of mythologies around the world, that words themselves could shape reality, that naming was akin to knowing. Perhaps because the first act of knowing was celestial, the naming of stars into patterns that reflected memory. To speak their names was to bring order to chaos, to turn randomness into constellation. The slow recognition that the mind could map infinity changed every horizon. As humans saw repetition in the sky, they realized that life, too, followed pattern. Death was no longer an end, but a return, just as the sun rose again, just as the constellations reappeared on schedule. The heavens taught resurrection long before religion, they taught renewal before philosophy. Night became humanity's first temple. Every open field was an altar, every observer a priest. The act of watching the cosmos became meditation. Beneath the spinning stars, those ancient souls felt the pulse of reality aligning with their own breathing. Awareness expanded beyond the body into something vast and serene. The universe was no longer distant, it was within. That realization reshaped fear. Where once darkness had represented danger, now it represented depth. The heavens turned death into continuity, chaos into cycle, nothingness into possibility. The mind learned that extinction could not exist in a symmetrical cosmos where everything returned, where no motion was wasted. From this understanding came hope, the rarest and most profound human faith. As speech and story grew more complex, people began articulating ethical visions derived from celestial order. The balance between light and dark taught fairness, the steady return of seasons taught trust, the interdependence of stars taught compassion. The moral codes of emerging tribes were the reflection of cosmic geometry translated into human behavior. Each sunrise reenacted creation. Each nightfall repeated the mystery of retreat and renewal. The motions of the sky became the rhythm of life, imprinted so deeply that even after millennia we still measure our worth and meaning against these patterns. The cosmic mind that opened in those first observers still breathes within every human act of wonder today. The emergence of symbolic thinking, the ability to connect what was seen to what was felt, transformed consciousness. The stars were not only lights, they were the first mirrors, showing humanity the architecture of thought itself. Looking upward, people saw not just the cosmos, but their own awareness projected onto it. They realized that imagination could touch eternity. The harmony between human perception and celestial order inspired a quiet confidence in the structure of reality. Even when storms raged and harvests failed, the heavens assured order would one day return. That faith became the root of endurance, giving humanity strength to live through uncertainty. The sky promised that structure underlay even suffering. And beneath this trust grew self-awareness, the understanding that humanity knew it knew. The same intelligence that traced constellations could trace emotions. People began identifying themselves as something continuous with the cosmos, particles of starlight given the strange gift of reflection. For the first time, life looked back at the stars and recognized its own material. This awareness was sacred because it was shared. Every person who looked upward was part of the same experience, no matter their tribe or language. The same stars that guided hunters in one land guided sailors in another. The cosmos was universal witness, binding all who saw it into one silent communion. Through that bond, empathy took root. Even when people imagined gods, they were mirrors for this intimacy, sky fathers, mother moons, star-born ancestors, all embodiments of the same awareness seeking itself through metaphor. Religion and philosophy sprouted from this single act, gazing upward and feeling known by what one observed. The infinite seemed to notice back. From this relationship emerged the human longing for meaning that would never fade. It drove the carving of temples, the composition of songs, the birth of poetry. Each expression was an echo of that first revelation that consciousness and the cosmos were not separate, but reflections of the same mystery. Humanity had entered an age not only of counting stars but becoming them in thought. The spark that began in one mind spread like fire through generations. Every discovery, every work of art, every tool, was a continuation of that first night of awakening. The stars did not teach formulas, they taught awareness. They guided humanity not to where to go, but to what it was, to the infinite capacity to see, to connect, to wonder. Even now, when we look back at this long arc of early awareness, we sense that the cosmic mind of those ancestors still lingers in ours. The stars they named are the same we name today. Their questions remain our questions. Beneath all civilization's progress lies the same stillness, the same gaze upward, the same silent awe that started it all. To be human, they had learned, was to dwell between earth and heaven, body and myth, mortality and meaning. The cosmos was not above but within the vast sky mirrored in consciousness itself. That realization, carried through ages, is what continues to make every night sky feel like home. As the cosmic understanding of humanity deepened, the world began to change. The stars, once silent companions of the night, became instruments of knowledge. The myths that had guided nomads slowly transformed into systems of measurement and prediction. Human curiosity, now sharpened by reflection, began reaching for the language of numbers, geometry, and observation. The era of guesswork gave way to the era of record. Civilization itself grew from this awakening. When early societies learned that the heavens moved according to patterns, they did something revolutionary. They started recording those patterns. The sky became a text to be read and reread, its constellations not only symbols but coordinates. Humanity had awakened the desire to explain, to prove, to translate faith into precision. No longer content with storytelling alone, these early thinkers wanted to measure the divine. They began to track the phases of the moon, the movement of planets, the return of seasons with an intensity equal to devotion. The cosmos was now their calendar, and through this, time itself became a human invention. Villages became cities, and in those cities, priests turned into astronomers. The keepers of temples looked not only to please gods but to understand them. They kept tables of star positions, recorded eclipses, charted solstices. The act of looking up was now paired with the art of writing it down. This was the moment when mysticism began to merge with mathematics. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of order, clay tablets bore the traces of this revolution. Thousands of tiny markings represented the first known catalogues of celestial events. Every appearance of Venus, every disappearance of the moon, was noted carefully over centuries. The stars were no longer beyond comprehension, they could be predicted, and in that prediction lay the first sense of control over existence. To those ancient scribes, observation was sacred duty. They believed that by tracking the heavens, humanity could maintain cosmic balance. The night sky was a temple ceiling painted by gods, and the astronomer's job was to read the writing inscribed upon it. In that reading, humanity crossed the threshold from myth to measurement. The stars had become scripture written in light. Elsewhere, on the banks of the Nile, another transformation took root. Egyptian priests studied the rising of Sirius, whose appearance heralded the flooding of their river. From this single event sprang one of the earliest solar calendars. The stars were not distant wonders, they were tools of civilization. Time itself became a cycle of observation made permanent by human memory. In their temples, the Egyptians began carving the sky into their architecture. Ceilings were constellations, walls models of the cosmos. Every monument was not only a tomb or temple but a map of eternity. The pharaoh's ascendancy mirrored the sun's path, his death a setting sun destined to rise again in the celestial realm. Astronomy became theology, knowledge and belief balancing in one radiant idea. The same synthesis appeared in Sumer, Babylon, and Persia. Gazing from their high ziggurats, early astronomers watched planets crawl slowly across the sky. They noticed that some lights wandered, while others stayed fixed. The difference fascinated them. The wanderers Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn seemed alive, like thinking beings moving with choice. Thus were born the gods of motion, and along with them, the beginnings of astrology. Astrology was not superstition in those ages, it was philosophy, the attempt to read the intentions of the cosmos written in its own language of light. If the heavens moved with order, perhaps human fate did too. Each orbit, each conjunction, became an expression of deeper symmetry. The boundary between observer and observed blurred, humans began imagining that they participated in the very logic of the universe. From this grew the first abstraction of science. The Mesopotamians divided the sky into degrees, learned to divide circles, to measure time by the arc of celestial movement. Out of this geometry came the sexagesimal system, our division of an hour into 60 minutes, a minute into 60 seconds. The numbers by which we still live are echoes of starlight counted thousands of years ago. Yet the story was not linear. Each discovery led to new mystery. For every law they uncovered, another question arose. The stars gave knowledge generously, but never the final answer. The universe remained both teacher and trickster, always one step beyond full understanding. In this tension, humanity found not frustration but drive, the need to keep seeking. In the East, similar awakenings unfolded beneath different skies. In India, observers recorded movements of planets with astonishing accuracy. Their texts described lunar cycles so precisely that modern science still marvels at them. In China, imperial astronomers tracked comets and eclipses with meticulous care, believing such events carried messages for rulers. The celestial order was universal, yet every culture interpreted it through its own reflection of meaning. Everywhere, the night sky filled scrolls, tablets, and stone with symbols of knowledge. Mathematics evolved not from trade but from timekeeping, from the need to predict where the moon and sun would be. Measuring the cosmos taught humanity to measure itself. The same logic that charted the heavens soon solved the problems of land, architecture, and governance. Civilization's spine grew straight because it was modeled after the stars. In Greece, the thinkers of the classical world inherited this wisdom and dared to separate the divine from the mechanical. They began asking not who moved the heavens, but how it moved. The philosophical leap was immense, a recognition that understanding need not destroy reverence, that truth could be sacred without being hidden. Thales of Miletus, Pythagoras, Anaximander, these early seekers peered at the sky and saw not gods but geometry, spheres, and harmony. The music of the cosmos could be calculated. Pythagoras spoke of orbits as tones of a heavenly instrument, their distances forming chords too vast for the ear but perceptible to reason. The universe, he said, was not chaos, it was song frozen into motion. From those notions rose the idea of laws, unchanging truths that governed the movements of stars and men alike. The cosmos became a mechanism, majestic and vast, obeying principles discoverable through reasoning. In this realization, myth melted into mathematics, belief into pattern. The mind of humanity had crossed a threshold, the universe was intelligible. Still, this did not extinguish awe. For thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, the heavens remained divine because they were perfect. Their circular motion, unending and precise, symbolized eternity. The stars were the ideal toward which mortal life should aspire, steady, radiant, uncorrupted by decay. Philosophy became astronomy of the soul, teaching people to align inner order with cosmic order. The instruments followed the ideas. Simple sighting tools, sundials, and star maps appeared, crafted with elegant precision. The measuring of time turned portable. The celestial sphere could now be carried in miniature, carved into stone or painted on parchment. Humanity held the sky in its hands, and in doing so, held the reflection of its own mind, disciplined, curious, united with rhythm itself. As the centuries passed, the dream of understanding began to stretch beyond ritual. Observation turned into hypothesis, and hypothesis into proof. The Babylonians predicted eclipses, the Greeks calculated planetary motion, and sailors navigated by constellations across oceans. Knowledge now had movement, it traveled as light had once traveled, uniting civilizations under common stars. Yet something emotional remained unbroken. In the same breath that counted degrees and orbits, people still whispered prayers to the same lights they measured. They could quantify movement but not wonder. That blending of reason and reverence became the essence of the human condition, to know deeply and still be humbled by what one knows. In ancient libraries, scrolls of sky charts rested beside hymns to the planets. Priests and philosophers debated under the same domes, some using geometry, others poetry, all seeking the same still point. Science had not yet separated from spirit, both were children of the same awe. To read the heavens was still to read a sacred text, though the alphabet had changed. This age of transition taught humanity that knowledge was never contrary to mystery, it was how mystery blossomed. Each calculation cracked open more wonder. The farther the mind reached into the infinite, the grander the silence between stars became. The cosmos was not diminished by examination. It deepened, drawing the observer ever inward. Through this blending, civilization achieved balance. The calendar became the heart of governance, astronomy guided ritual and agriculture alike. Great temples and observatories rose together, bound by the same geometry. The builders had become both engineers and philosophers, crafting physical structures that mirrored celestial truth. The human intellect had discovered purpose, to understand creation through care, not conquest. Every recorded movement of the stars was a step toward the future. The transition from myth to measurement did not erase the sacred, it redefined it. Where once people worshipped the gods of the heavens, they now worshipped the harmony that held those heavens in motion. The divine had not vanished, it had expanded into law, into number, into comprehension. By the time writing blossomed into widespread tradition, this union had already shaped the destiny of all thought to come. Astronomy birthed mathematics, timekeeping shaped philosophy, and observation inspired faith in structure. Humanity had created what would later be called knowledge, but in the beginning it was something gentler, an act of listening. For knowledge is only organized wonder, and the first scientists were simply the most patient dreamers. Every measured star, every recorded orbit, was another heartbeat in the vast correspondence between sky and mind. This was not domination but partnership, the first conversation between humanity and the infinite, spoken in symbols of light and logic. Across the desert of time, those early records still whisper their intention. Clay and stone may crumble, but the patterns they describe remain unchanged. The stars they charted burn on, the laws they glimpsed endure. Even now, when we measure the same heavens with machines of metal and glass, we echo the gestures of those ancient observers kneeling beneath open skies. They began as mythmakers, became astronomers, and ended as something greater, listeners to the eternal rhythm that turns all things. Through them, the cosmos became conscious of itself. It is a lineage stretching unbroken from caves lit by fire to laboratories lit by electricity, one continuous thought that began when a human being first looked up and asked not just what the stars were, but why they moved at all. And so, after this long journey through time, we find ourselves here beneath the same sky our ancestors watched in silence. Above us stretch the same constellations that guided hunters through forests, sailors across oceans, and farmers through the seasons. The light we see tonight is the same light painted on cave walls, framed between Göbekli Tepe's pillars, and caught in the corridors of ancient temples. The story has never ended, it has only changed its voice. Modern eyes see further. Telescopes pierce darkness deeper than the human imagination of prehistory could have conceived. Probes sail beyond planets, carrying our instruments and questions into the edges of the solar system. Spacecraft replace stone circles, and radio antennas stand where once men and women lifted torches toward the night. Yet their purpose remains the same: to listen, to learn, to understand why we are here. We measure light years now instead of days between star risings, but we still look for patterns. Computers process data gathered from distant galaxies, replacing the careful counting of shadow lengths on the ground. Science extends what the human senses began, but at its heart the impulse is unchanged. We are still the watchers. Even with satellites overhead and rovers on Mars, the sight of a starry sky still stirs something no science can explain. The thrill is not only in the discovery but in the recognition these points of light have been with us from the beginning. They have seen every story we have written, every dream we have pursued. They are the oldest witnesses we have. Technology has carried our gaze outward, but it has also brought the cosmos closer to us. Images of distant nebulae and swirls of newborn stars reach our screens instantly, allowing even those in crowded cities to be touched by the infinite. We no longer need to travel to a desert temple to stand in wonder, the universe comes to meet us wherever we are. And yet, if we pause and step outside, away from the hum of machines, the same quiet that ancient humans knew will find us too. Above, the unbroken dome of night reminds us that our story is part of something far greater than our brief individual lives. The vast distances between stars feel less like separation and more like a promise that there is always more to know, always more to explore. In our time, we have learned that the elements of our bodies were forged inside stars. We carry their dust in our bones, their atoms in our breath. The connection that our ancestors intuited is now proven. We are literally made of the same matter, shaped by the same forces. The universe is not only around us, it is within us. Ancient stone alignments have become observatories orbiting the Earth. Instead of tracking the return of Sirius to predict floods, we now watch deep space for signals, studying planets in other star systems for signs of life. Our horizon has grown, stretching far beyond the edge of sight. But the feeling of waiting for a revelation from the sky has not changed. From recording the rising of a single star to mapping billions of galaxies, our tools have grown in precision, but the question remains the same: where do we fit in this vast design? The answer does not come quickly, perhaps it never will, but the act of seeking shapes us, generation after generation. Our progress is not just in distance reached but in awareness found. Every photograph from a space telescope is another kind of ancient star map. Where we once traced animals in the constellations, now we trace filaments of galaxies in the deep field. The shapes have changed, the scale has expanded, but the impulse is exactly the same. We are finding images in the infinite that tell us who we are. Modern astronomy does not erase the legacy of the Stone Age sky watch as it completes it. We are the latest chapter in an unbroken tradition of humans looking up and making sense of the lights above. The painted dots on a cave wall, the carved beasts on a pillar, the stone circle catching the sunrise, all lead to the blinking lights of satellites and the digital charts of the stars. And still, the most profound truth we carry from our ancestors is not about science alone, it's about belonging. The stars do not merely exist for us to study. We exist within their story, sharing the same origin. In knowing them, we begin to know ourselves. In measuring them, we measure our own hopes and boundaries. Every age has had its own way of translating this connection. For the first people, it was stories around the fire. For the first cities, it was rituals in temples. For our time, it is technology and shared images across the world. But beneath each layer of innovation beats the same heart, the desire to feel part of the universe's great and unending rhythm. Perhaps this is the real message written in ancient star maps and temple corridors, that it does not matter how far we see, only that we continue to look. The journey is not about conquering the sky, but walking beside it, letting its changes mark our own. The stars do not rush, neither should we. The sky has waited billions of years. It will wait as long as we need. So tonight, wherever you are, let the night sky find you. Step into its silence. See in its depth the same shapes that guided humanity from shadows to cities. Imagine the long line of eyes before yours, each pair looking upward with the same mixture of awe and longing. Feel the recognition across time that you are one of them, and they are all part of you. The story will continue as it always has. New generations will watch the stars with tools we cannot yet imagine. New names will rise for constellations old and new. Somewhere, far from now, people will tell stories about us, about what we knew, what we sought, what we built to keep our place among the stars. We will join the unbroken chain of the watchers. And so, my friends, as we close this long journey together, I invite you to carry the sky with you. Let it remind you of your place in something eternal, something vast yet intimate. The universe has always spoken in the quiet language of light and shadow. It is up to us to keep listening. Thank you for walking with me through the ancient night, for letting your mind travel back to the fires and stone circles, for standing alongside the first astronomers, and for looking with them into the infinite. Until we meet again beneath these same stars, may your nights be full of wonder, your thoughts full of light, and your heart forever aligned with the rhythm of the cosmos.